for this inaugural webinar. As you know, on Friday, June 24th, the United States Supreme Court overturned Roe in the historic ruling on the Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization case. The legality of abortion now returns to the states. Sadly, here in New Jersey, the Dobbs ruling will not limit access to abortions in the state. In fact, over the past few months and years, pro-abortion advocates have redoubled their efforts to expand access to abortion, virtually making it available for any reason or no reason at all. In response to the United States Supreme Court ruling, the Catholic bishops of New Jersey recognized that now is the time for Catholics and people of goodwill to work together to continue our efforts to build a society where every woman has the support and resources she needs to bring her child into this world in love. Our goal is to have this webinar provide you, the attendees, the following: a legal analysis of the Dobbs decision, insights on how establishing a culture of life is much more than simply opposing pro-abortion legislation, tips and suggestions on concrete actionable steps we can take in our communities to help mothers, children, and families. Just one housekeeping item as we continue, or before we continue. Feel free to submit a question at any time throughout tonight's discussion using the Q&A tab on your bar. Our webinar is scheduled for an hour, and we'll attempt to answer as many of your questions as possible during the question and answer segment at the end of our discussion. Now tonight, Bishop David O'Connell of the Diocese of Trenton has recorded our special opening prayer and welcome message for all of us. He regrets that he cannot be here with us live, but has a scheduling conflict, but was most gracious and eager to record this message for us.
Together, let us pray for life. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord Jesus, you are the source and lover of life. Reawaken in us respect for every human life. Help us to see in each child the marvelous work of our Creator. Open our hearts to welcome every child as a unique and wonderful gift. Guide the work of doctors, nurses, and midwives. May the life of a mother and her baby in the womb be equally cherished and respected. Help those who make our laws to uphold the uniqueness and sacredness of every human life, from the first moment of conception to natural death. Give us wisdom and generosity to build a society that cares for all, that is truly a culture of life. Together with Mary, your mother, in whose womb you took on our human nature, help us to choose life in every decision we make. We ask this in the joyful hope of eternal life with you and in the communion of the Blessed Trinity. Amen. For almost 50 years now, pro-life Catholics and people of goodwill in the United States have prayed fervently, lobbied hard, participated in marches, and raised their voices consistently that the fateful 1973 decision of the Supreme Court, Roe v. Wade, making abortion a constitutional right, would be overturned. Given the strident and unrelenting advocacy of those who have supported abortion over the years, it seemed an almost unreachable goal. Now that goal has been achieved in the Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization decision of the Supreme Court. Since 1973, approximately 64 million babies have been sacrificed to the pro-choice, pro-abortion agenda. This is a horrific fact. Writing for the majority of the Supreme Court of the United States, Justice Samuel Alito has rendered his decision returning the issue of abortion to the people's elected representatives, writing that the so-called, and I quote him, right to abortion is not deeply rooted in the nation's history or traditions. Here in New Jersey, which boasts of the most permissive abortion laws in our country, pro-life Catholics and people of goodwill still have much work to be done. Our opponents are many and occupy the highest positions in the state. We must continue the good work that the Dobbs decision represents and persistently proclaim the sanctity of every person in order to end the scourge of abortion and any attack on human life. We must persevere in our support of pregnant women and young families facing difficult circumstances, so that they must never feel that abortion is their only option, their only choice. The innocent, vulnerable unborn, and their mothers deserve no less. My friends, I am honored today to lead us in prayer and to express my grateful support and that of my brother bishops here in the Garden State, to Mr. James King, Executive Director of the New Jersey Catholic Conference, and the panelists he has assembled and invited to lead us through this important seminar this evening. May this be the occasion for our growth and understanding, and help us build the foundation for our continued work for the cause of life here in New Jersey and, please God, throughout our nation.
So thank you to Bishop O'Connell for preparing that opening prayer and his remarks as we begin our panel discussion. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists, and I have to say that the panelists we have tonight really are setting the bar high for our first webinar. It's going to be tough to have these efforts again. We have some very intelligent, active people in the pro-life work of the church, and I'm just thrilled that they have so graciously agreed to be with us and are generous with their time tonight. So first, let me introduce Mr. Paul Linton. He will be leading our discussion on the legal analysis of the Dobbs case. Mr. Linton is an attorney in private practice. He has been professionally engaged in the pro-life movement for 35 years, first at Americans United for Life, a national public interest law firm where he was general counsel, then in his own practice prior to working for AUL. Mr. Linton served as a law clerk and staff attorney for the Illinois Appellate Court and as an assistant state's attorney for the Cook County State's Attorney's Office in Chicago. Mr. Linton has published more than 24 law review articles on a variety of topics, including the history of abortion regulation, state and federal constitutional law, criminal law, religious freedom claims, and defense under state constitutions, sex discrimination, and assisted suicide. Mr. Linton received his undergraduate degree and his JD degree from Loyola University of Chicago. All right. Our next panelist is Dr. Charlie Camosy. He is currently serving as professor of medical humanities at Creighton University School of Medicine. In addition, he holds the Monsignor Curran Fellowship in Moral Theology at St. Joseph Seminary in New York. Before that, Dr. Camosy spent 14 years in Fordham University's theology department, where he taught since finishing his PhD in theology at Notre Dame in 2008. Among other places, his published articles have appeared in the American Journal of Bioethics, Journal of Medicine and Philosophy, Journal of the Catholic Health Association, New York Times, Washington Post, New York Daily News, and America Magazine. He has monthly columns with Religion News Service and Angelus, and does weekly interviews for The Pillar. He is the author of 6 books, with 2 more on the way. In addition to advising the Faith and Outreach Office of the Humane Society of the United States and Pro-Life Commission of the Archdiocese of New York, Dr. Camosy received the 2018 St. Jerome Award for Scholarly Excellence from the Catholic Library Association. He and his wife, Pauline, have 4 children. 3 of whom were adopted from a Filipino orphanage in June of 2016. Dr. Camosi will discuss the impact abortion has on individuals and all society. His talk will focus on how those of us in the pro-life movement need to do more than just oppose pro-abortion legislation, but need to proactively support policies that help mothers, children, and families obtain the resources they need to live a flourishing life. Finally, we have Mrs. Rachel Hendricks, coordinator of the Diocese of Trenton Respect Life Office. Rachel will provide us an overview of the work of her office and what they are doing to engage Catholics in the Diocese of Trenton to take on these new efforts of helping moms in need throughout the diocese. So thank you all for being with us. Paul, we're going to start with you, if you wouldn't mind running us through some of the legal analysis with the Dobbs case, and we'll go from there. So Paul, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Well, as has been commented, on June 24th, the Supreme Court in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization overruled its earlier decisions in Roe versus Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which had recognized a federal constitutional right to abortion. In Dobbs, a majority of the court held that there is no federal constitutional right to abortion. Henceforth, the regulation of abortion, including whether abortion should be prohibited, is a matter for the states to decide. In my presentation this evening, I will discuss in more detail what Dobbs held and how the court's decision overruling Roe and Casey will affect abortion legislation at both the state and federal level. First, a little bit about the background of the case. In 2018, Mississippi enacted a law prohibiting abortion after the 15 weeks of pregnancy. The law permits abortion after 15 weeks in a medical emergency and in cases of severe fetal abnormality. Essentially, abortions after 15 weeks are prohibited unless the continuation of the pregnancy would likely result in the death of the pregnant woman or very serious injury to her physical health, or if the unborn child has a physical condition that is incompatible with life after birth. The law was challenged by the only remaining abortion provider in Mississippi, Jackson Women's Health Organization, and one of its physicians. A federal district court declared the law unconstitutional and permanently enjoined its enforcement because the law violated the Supreme Court's holding in Roe, which was reaffirmed in Casey, that the states have no authority to prohibit abortion before viability. 15 weeks gestation, the point in pregnancy that Mississippi chose to prohibit abortion, is well before any unborn child would be viable. The Federal Court of Appeals affirmed the district court's judgment, and Mississippi sought Supreme Court review of the Court of Appeals judgment. The Supreme Court, several months after the petition for review was filed, granted the petition with respect to a single question, whether all prohibitions of elective abortions before viability are unconstitutional. The case was argued on December 1st of last year and decided on June 24th of this year. Well, what did the court hold? In Dobbs, a majority of the court overruled Roe versus Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey and held that there is no federal constitutional right to abortion. The majority opinion was written by Justice Alito and was joined by Justice Thomas, Justice Gorsuch, Justice Kavanaugh, and Justice Barrett. Chief Justice Roberts concurred in the result only to uphold the 15-week ban, and Justices Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan dissented. The court began its opinion noting that the Constitution does not expressly address the issue of abortion. In Roe, however, the court derived an implied right of privacy, a right of abortion, from a generalized right of privacy that in turn was based on the First, Fourth, Fifth, Ninth, and 14th Amendments. In reaffirming Roe 19 years later in the Casey case, the court abandoned the privacy rationale underlying Roe and held that a right to abortion was implicit in the liberty language of the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. In Dobbs, the majority held that neither privacy theory nor the liberty language of the Due Process Clause supports a right to abortion. Regardless of the alleged source of a right to abortion, under the court's well-established precedents an implied right, that is, a right that's not expressly provided for in the Constitution, will not be found to exist unless it is deeply rooted in the nation's history and tradition and is an essential component of what is called ordered liberty. In Dobbs, the court set forth compelling evidence that in English and American common law, abortion, at least after quickening, which is that stage of pregnancy when the woman first detects fetal movement, usually 16 to 18 weeks, was criminal. Moreover, if a pregnant woman died as the result of an abortion performed at any stage of pregnancy, other than to save her life, the person performing the abortion could be charged with homicide. In sum, there was no right to abortion at common law before or after quickening. The Dobbs court then examined the 19th century enactment of statutes replacing and extending the common law's prohibition of abortion. At the time the 14th Amendment was adopted in 1868, more than 3/4 of the states, 28 out of 37, had enacted statutes prohibiting abortion at any stage of pregnancy, thereby undermining any claim that the drafters of the 14th Amendment had any intention of creating a right to abortion. The court also cited a series of state court decisions recognizing that these statutes had been enacted with an intention to protect unborn human life. The court held that it is for the people acting through their state legislatures to strike the proper balance between the interest of the woman who wants an abortion and the interest of the state in protecting unborn human life. Finally, the court said attempts to justify a right to abortion by appealing to a broader right of personal autonomy proves too much. Such a broad right would encompass a right to use illicit drugs, prostitution, and the like. Having determined that the Constitution, properly understood, does not protect a right to abortion, the court in Dobbs next addressed whether the judicial doctrine of stare decisis, that is, the rule that courts should normally follow their earlier precedents, barred reconsideration of Roe and Casey. The court held that this doctrine did not preclude reconsideration. The majority opinion identified 5 factors in determining whether stare decisis should preclude reconsideration of Roe and Casey: the nature of the court's error, the quality of the court's reasoning, the workability of the earlier decision, its effect on other areas of law, and the existence of any plausible or justifiable reliance interest in the perpetuation of the earlier decision. Now, time does not permit a discussion of each of these factors. Suffice it to say that the court in Dobbs concluded that the doctrine of stare decisis did not bar reconsideration of either Roe or Casey. I should briefly mention, however, that the court in Dobbs demonstrated beyond question that Roe and Casey's holding that viability, the stage of pregnancy when an unborn child can survive outside the mother with or without medical assistance, that marks the earliest stage in pregnancy when the states could prohibit abortion, was unprincipled and unjustified, a conclusion none of the dissenters in Dobbs questioned. The court held that overruling Roe and Casey would not affect any other rights that had been derived from the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. Finally, the court held that it could not allow any alleged political considerations, one way or the other, to influence its decision to overrule Roe and Casey. But once the court overruled Roe and Casey, and having held that the Constitution does not protect a right to abortion, the court needed to determine what's the appropriate standard for reviewing legislation affecting abortion. The court said that the appropriate standard was the rational basis standard. Under this standard, legislation will be upheld regulating abortion so long as it is rationally related to any conceivable legitimate state interest. The court identified 6 such interests in Dobbs: the preservation of prenatal life at all stages of development, the protection of maternal health and safety, the elimination of particularly gruesome or barbaric medical procedures, the preservation of the integrity of the medical profession, the mitigation of fetal pain, and the prevention of discrimination on the basis of race, sex, or disability. The court held that Mississippi's 15-week abortion ban satisfied the rational basis standard and reversed the judgment of the Court of Appeals and remanded the case for further proceedings consistent with its opinion. Before addressing the implications of Dobbs for state and federal legislation, I should point out the court also rejected any equal protection clause challenge to abortion laws. In a brief discussion of this issue early in its opinion, the court, citing several of its own precedents, held that legislation regulating abortion is not sex-based discrimination and therefore need not satisfy the standard of judicial review applicable to such discrimination. What about the concurring and dissenting opinions? Both Justice Thomas and Justice Kavanaugh filed separate concurring opinions. Because both justices joined the majority opinion in full, I will not discuss their concurrences. Chief Justice Roberts filed an opinion concurring only in the judgment. The Chief Justice, I think it's fair to say, would not uphold a ban on abortion throughout pregnancy. He recognized the viability rule could not be justified, but he thought that was not an essential component of either decision, given that the majority opinion had thoroughly debunked that approach. He agreed that the Mississippi law was constitutional, but he would go no further than that. It is clear from a careful reading of his concurring in the judgment opinion that he believes there is a right to abortion, at least far enough into pregnancy to provide most women with a reasonable opportunity to choose abortion. As I said, he would not have voted to uphold a law banning abortion throughout pregnancy. The joint dissenting opinion of Justices Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan was noteworthy more for what it did not say than what it did. The dissent made no effort to defend the reasonableness or logic of the viability rule. It made no real effort to dispute the majority's position that there was no right to abortion in English or American common law or under the statutes in effect at the time the 14th Amendment was adopted, or for that matter, up to the time Roe was decided in 1973, when 30 states still prohibited abortion, except to save the life of the mother. The dissent instead advanced an extreme version of the doctrine of stare decisis, under which it would be virtually impossible to overrule any prior precedent, no matter how poorly reasoned and no matter how inconsistent with a proper interpretation of the Constitution. Well, what are the implications of the decision in Dobbs for state and federal legislation? Well, clearly under the rational basis standard that the court has adopted, virtually any regulation of abortion, including any prohibition of abortion, will be constitutional. The only caveat to this statement is that a law that would prohibit an abortion to save the life of the mother would not likely be upheld under that standard. However, no state has ever enacted such a law, nor is any state likely to do so. Presently, 18 states have laws on the books that prohibit virtually all abortions throughout pregnancy. After Dobbs, none of those statutes could be successfully challenged on federal constitutional grounds. Another 5 or 6 states may enact similar statutes later this year. The fact that there is no longer any federal constitutional impediment to abortion regulations, including prohibitions, does not mean, however, that there are no state constitutional impediments to such legislation. As you know, the New Jersey Supreme Court has recognized the state constitutional right to abortion in cases striking down public funding restrictions of abortion and mandating parental consent. The opinion in Dobbs does not affect those decisions. In order to be able to enact meaningful restrictions on abortion in New Jersey, you would need to amend your state constitution, as a number of states have, or persuade your Supreme Court to overrule the decisions in this area, neither of which is likely in the foreseeable future, I regret to say. Your inability to prohibit abortion is not peculiar to New Jersey, however. State constitutional barriers to abortion prohibitions also exist in many other states, including Alaska, California, Florida, Kansas, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Montana, New Mexico, New York, and Vermont. Moreover, in most of those states, there is no political will to enact legislation protective of unborn children. The situation in Florida and Kansas may soon change, either as the result of a possible overruling decision in Florida or a state constitutional amendment in Kansas that will be voted on next month. What about federal legislation restricting abortion? Nothing in Dobbs would preclude Congress from enacting a federal statute prohibiting abortion. Needless to say, such a statute is not on the horizon, but if enacted at some point, it will be a valid exercise of congressional power under the Commerce Clause. The converse, however, is not true, in my opinion. That is, in my judgment, Congress does not have the authority to enact a federal statute that would overturn state laws prohibiting abortion. That would violate the 10th Amendment. So in conclusion, the Supreme Court's opinion in Dobbs represents the successful culmination of an almost 50 years effort to overrule Roe versus Wade. That effort would not have succeeded if persons like yourself had not kept this issue alive during the intervening 49 years. There is much work left to be done at both the state and federal level to extend the protection of the law to all unborn children. But after Dobbs, the federal Constitution is no longer a barrier to pursuing that work. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Paul, for the insights and your legal analysis, your expert legal analysis of the Dobbs decision and its implications at the state level, especially here in New Jersey and other states. I know I've heard some elected officials here in New Jersey say, they would like to make New Jersey the California of the East Coast. So I wasn't surprised to hear California on the list of the challenges faced in terms of the constitutionality or fighting the constitutional amendments when it comes to abortion. Next, moving along, I'd like to introduce Dr. Camosi for the next portion of our talk. I do not want to take up any time trying to summarize what he is going to talk about. It's a thrill. I've had the opportunity to talk to you, Dr. Camosi, Charlie, over the last few weeks and get to know you. And I think what you're going to present is extremely critical, especially now, because we're at that point where for decades we were working to overturn Roe and we were praying to overturn Roe, and now we're at this point where it's happened. So a lot of us are going, well, what's next? What do we do next? And I think you're going to help frame that in terms of a larger scope of just not fighting laws that promote abortion, but how do we make it more of a holistic approach in society and show the impact of that. So without further ado, the floor is yours, Charlie. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Grateful for your invitation and to be with such a great panel here. I'm looking forward to the question and answer, so I don't want to take up too much time with my formal remarks, but I will say that even though I'm a transplant from the Midwest, I've been here 10 years, and I think I figured out something. It's going to be very difficult for us to pass pro-life legislation that restricts abortion. Obviously, we just heard a lot about that. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try. That doesn't mean that prenatal justice shouldn't be a focus, obviously, of what we're up to. We have a really important, difficult task ahead of us, right? Which involves changing the hearts and minds of our fellow residents of the state. And a foundational goal, it seems to me, especially as Catholics, should be that we try to convince folks of two things. First, that we do what we do because we care about women, and that there is no tension at all between working for justice for women and justice for prenatal children. I think it's a good rule of thumb to say, let's try to talk about abortion never unless we're talking about both mother and child together, a kind of dyad, right? It's a unique, I was just talking with somebody at lunch about this today. It's the most unique kind of relationship there is, and we should honor that by talking about both. Second, I think we need to focus, especially as Catholics, on a preferential option for the poor, one of the most important principles of Catholic social teaching, obviously. And we should just do that, period. Our salvation depends on it, right? As Catholics, Matthew 25 makes that abundantly clear. But here's something to chew on. Gallup continually finds again and again that it's the poor, the economically vulnerable, and especially economically vulnerable people of color who are most against abortion, right? If you come from a household of under $40,000 per year, you're most likely going to be anti-abortion. And if you're coming from a household of over $100,000 a year, you're most likely pro-choice. There are exceptions, of course, to that, but in general, that's what we find again and again and again. So if we add to that the fact that the population most likely to be against abortion has the clear majority of abortions, then a really diabolical situation presents itself, right? Hundreds of thousands of economically vulnerable people from our state over the years have been pushed to have abortions that they think are deeply and morally wrong, that they know best. If you look at it demographically, they know best that it's in fact a killing of their own child, right? Of their own children. What a diabolical situation it must be, right? To be put into such a compromised moral situation, right? And so we have, I think if we're gonna have a preferential option for the poor, it's kind of a two-level one, focused on the material problem and issues that are leading towards a majority of the abortions, but also on the fact that it means what it means to listen to these vulnerable voices, these marginalized voices, is in fact a pro-life thing. And that's maybe a kind of way in to talk to, you know, people who identify with the left, who think they have a preferential option for the poor, but when it comes to abortion, actually have something quite different. And Pope Francis, I think, really has an interesting way to talk about this too. The economically secure or privileged in this country really treat this population, at least when it comes to abortion, as a classic throwaway population, right? Pope Francis talks about throwaway culture. And obviously babies are literally being discarded, right? Which I think is one of the most helpful ways to think about it, the horror of abortion. But in a very real way, the women themselves and sometimes the extended families themselves, the families themselves are also being discarded. Certainly their authentic choices are being discarded as well. I mean, there's certainly structural coercion, to use a somewhat fancy phrase, going on here. I mean, just to put meat on those bones, I taught for 14 years and lived for several years in the Bronx. And the abortion rate there was, depending on what year you'd look at during that time, was somewhere between 45 and 50% of every single pregnancy ended in abortion. And again, it was one of the poorest areas of the country, and so had the people who were most against abortion. So think about the structural coercion that must be going on there. And we can talk maybe more about that, but I want to bring up one specific example. Imagine the following scenario. Imagine a woman who already has 2 kids. She's living with her boyfriend in a small apartment. The boyfriend is paying the rent. She gets pregnant, and the boyfriend says, unless you have an abortion, I'm out of here and you're going to be on your own. Or maybe even kicks them out if it's his place, right? How should we think about, well, certainly that's not any kind of choice, right? But it's a scenario that happens again and again and again. Intimate partner violence correlates very highly with abortion. So in thinking about the kinds of interventions we can talk about that aren't just about restricting abortion, but addressing these foundational coercive structures that are in place, what about I just saw a stat the other day that we have 3 pregnancy help centers for every single abortion clinic in the United States. That's a huge pro-life victory, a huge pro-life win. What if a high percentage of those actually also served as shelters for women, right? A place for a woman and her 2, or in the case of a pregnant woman, 3 children to go, right? Who is in that kind of situation. That takes money, that takes resources, that takes the kind of interventions, I think, at a state level that we need here. But we can cooperate with people, right? We can cooperate with people who don't agree with us on the making abortion illegal, right? To protect prenatal justice, but who would say, yeah, it's awful that the abortion rates are that high. It's awful that women are being coerced into abortions they don't want to have. In fact, this is common ground between pro-lifers and people who are pro-choice, right? Pro-lifers, obviously, but people who are genuinely pro-choice are also going to want to have interventions to make sure that it's a genuine choice and not something that it's structured, that the coercion is taking place via structures which lead them to have abortions they don't want to have, which is exactly what's happened. I'll just finish by giving you some St. John Paul II here as a Catholic moral theologian here, in ways that I think might kind of contextualize other kinds of interventions. This is from his encyclical back in the 1980s called Laborem Exercens. He says, quote, "In this context, it should be emphasized that on a more general level, the whole labor process must be organized and adapted in such a way as to respect the requirements of the person and his or her forms of life, above all in the home, taking into account the individual's age and sex. It is a fact that in many societies," this is the 80s he's talking about, right? "Women work in nearly every sector of life, but it is fitting that they should be able to fulfill their tasks in accordance with their own nature, without being discriminated against, without being excluded from jobs of which they are capable, but also without lack of respect for the family aspirations and their specific role contributing together with men to the good of society. The true advancement of women requires that labor should be structured in such a way that women do not have to pay for their advancement by abandoning what is specific to them at expense of the family in which women and mothers have an irreplaceable role. That's number 19, in case you're interested. So one of the things I'll finish with this point. We can work with people who disagree with us here in the state of New Jersey on abortion, but we can work with those very same people about these, with respect to these structural, the way we structure labor, right? And specifically how we structure labor with respect to women, and specifically with women who are mothers and have duties to their children. And that's our Catholic faith, that's our Catholic teaching, just as much as Evangelium Vitae is part of our Catholic teaching. And if we have that holistic approach, I think we really can dialogue with our fellow citizens who disagree with us otherwise on abortion.
Charlie, thank you for that presentation and that overview in terms of expanding and taking that more holistic view of how we build a culture of life, not just simply opposing the abortion laws, as we've said, but looking at how do we provide quality services, life-affirming services, and really try to address the root causes of the obstacles women and families, especially low income, living in poverty, struggling with poverty, and many of our families that are in these communities, that oftentimes you get presented as almost impossible to come out of. Just to something you had said in your presentation, and I was actually having a conversation with my wife the other day about this very issue, and I said, the way the abortion issue or the option of abortion is often framed, it's making it seem as though there's never been an instance of anybody who's ever come out of poverty, and that what we're saying to women, mothers, expectant mothers, is that it's so impossible to come out of poverty. The better option is death. I think we thrive as a nation, showing that many hundreds of examples of people who have lifted themselves out of poverty. So I just, that resonated with me again, thinking what you were saying. When you said that, what we're trying to do here, we're presenting an option of saying, some of these outcomes or these possible outcomes are so severe that a better outcome is death. And I don't think any of us would really agree with that, and that's really not who we are. That's not part of the fabric of our country. People come here to achieve the American dream, so thank you again. I see some questions coming in, some that I hope that you'll be able to help us answer in our Q&A segment. So thank you. All right, so next I would like to welcome Rachel Hendricks. I realized that in the initial presentation, I kind of did a very quick introduction, and I hope that it was not intentional. I looked at my notes and I only had the topic you were going to speak on. So I want to take a moment though and thank Rachel in front of all of our attendees. She was really one of the main catalysts behind this webinar, really working with NJCC to do the webinar. She's been extremely helpful. It was helpful connecting us with Charlie, brainstorming with us on the topics. So we really would not be here tonight without your efforts, Rachel. So thank you on behalf of everyone here at NJCC, myself, the bishops. Thank you for your efforts tonight. And that's not. And also, I didn't want to gloss over your experience. I mean, you have tremendous experience in the pro-life community. Your educational background. Your work background in the pharmacy industry makes you an expert to talk on this subject. And now what you're doing in the diocese to really kind of take what Charlie said we ought to be doing and really trying to put that into practice every day. So we're thrilled to have you here. We're looking forward to hearing what you're saying, what you have to offer, and hopefully people can take these tips and put that back into take them back into their own communities and work, to put some of these ideas into practice as we move forward in this post-Dobbs, post-Roe world that we now live in. So, Rachel, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks so much. I'm humbled and grateful for the invitation to take part in this webinar as a panelist, and just grateful to be able to share all this information that we had, and grateful to all those who are joining us tonight. And we'll also review the the recording of this. So my role in the Diocese of Trenton is as coordinator for Respect Life Ministries. So my primary role is to support and encourage those people in the parishes, like the boots on the ground, the people that are working in their communities to build a culture of life. I also seek to assist any of our schools, religious ed programs, and other ministry work to build a culture of life in the work that they do. So I don't want to assume that we have a whole audience of people that are already involved in Respect Life Ministry, because we are very hopeful that we have some new interested ears among our group of population in the audience. And so I just thought I'd mention that Respect Life Ministry is kind of based on 4 pillars of action in our parishes. And they are prayer, education and awareness, public advocacy, and service and outreach. Now, in this post-Roe era that we're entering right now, our bishops have really called on us to really highlight those areas where we show service and outreach to the communities around us, and certainly for those moms and those families in need, certainly those that are the most abortion vulnerable. And I'll talk more about the bishop's request for us to really start stepping up our activities in service and outreach, showing the compassion of the church. And really leading with that compassion, service, and mercy that we show. I'll just say a quick thing about the prayer. We have incredible prayer warriors, whether it's praying in front of abortion clinics, holy hours for life, all kinds of consistent prayer efforts. We even have regular Zoom groups since the COVID days, really praying for an end to abortion. And so we want all those efforts to continue. We invite everyone to join in those prayer efforts, especially with groups. And also I would like to just ask everyone to consider adding fasting, the practice of fasting, to our prayer. In Mark 9:29, Jesus tells his disciples that some demons are only cast out through prayer and fasting. And noting this, Cardinal O'Connor, who is the founder of the Sisters of Life, asked them to continue in their efforts for pro-life activities and supporting moms in need, to really include prayer and fasting as kind of the main point of their inspiration and their continued way that they lead the work that they do. Education and awareness is always important. We're doing that tonight. Our Catholic communities really need to stay on top of many of these issues. So we're welcoming all these opportunities that the New Jersey Catholic Conference will continue to offer us to advance our awareness. And public advocacy, we talked a little bit about that. And Charlie, you talked a little bit about, when the Roe decision came down, like I was expecting it. Some people thought it was like another boy who cried wolf and that this wouldn't happen. I'm like, no, it's going to happen. But I'll tell you that when it actually happened, it took me by surprise, even though I was expecting it. And although we rejoice in Thanksgiving for the reversal of this egregious Roe v. Wade decision in 1973, we also reserve some of that celebration for the day that we really have true prenatal justice in this world. And even in a state like New Jersey, where many will say, well, nothing's really changed here, we can't really do anything, we have to recognize that this Dobbs decision really offers us a pathway forward to true prenatal justice and real holistic care for women and families. Dobbs created a situation where we're starting to see it. We all have to really respond to the views of economically vulnerable people, because those are the people that are most affected by abortion, although we don't want to dismiss others that are impacted by abortion as well. Where Roe created an obstacle to extending protection of the law to the weakest and most vulnerable, now that obstacle is removed, and we begin the really hard work of working and persuading friends, family members, neighbors, with whom many of us don't share the same views about the dignity of the unborn. But we need to find a way to work together, as was mentioned, the common ground that we can find together. And all of us need to find a willingness really to work in whatever way we can to help protect these women, these unborn babies and families from feeling that coercion into abortion that many of them really do experience. This can be kind of comfortable, traditionally, many of our pro-life folks may not always support some of what's considered traditionally to be kind of more liberal views on social safety nets, but Charlie's done some great work to really show that these efforts to offer real legislative help for pregnant moms in need and for the economically vulnerable, they really do reduce abortions in our nation. So we really need to get behind that support. So I would recommend, and as I do recommend all my contacts in our parishes, to go to njcatholic.org. That's the New Jersey Catholic Conference's website. Sign up for those action alerts so that you can be made aware of any legislative items that would help you to support women and families who are in need and abortion vulnerable. So now I'm going to talk mostly about the service and outreach efforts that our bishops are really calling on us to really act upon. From the U.S. Bishop's statement to our New Jersey, collective New Jersey bishops statement, and pretty much any other bishop statements that you'll read, obviously they are enthusiastic and grateful for the overturn of Roe. And then they quickly pivot to like, we need to really highlight those opportunities that we have through our Catholic Church and our Christian communities to support these moms in need. We have, as Charlie mentioned, I think, 3 pregnancy crisis centers for everyone, abortion clinic in many of our areas, and we need to make these centers of help even more obvious and noticeable to those women and families that are in need. So it's almost like it's not enough to just know in a general sense that the church is here to help women in need and the Christian communities are here to help women in need, but we really need to be equipped at the local level, right in our parishes, in our neighborhoods, and in our communities to be able to offer that assistance to really walk with these women and families in need. And I'll say we're going to talk a lot about women and children, and certainly our focus needs to be there. Charlie, you touched, on that incredible dyad. I mean, even from a biochemical standpoint and embryological standpoint, there's some amazing scientific data that really just shows that relational connection between mother and baby. But we don't want to leave fathers completely out of our conversations as well. I think sometimes when we focus so much on the mother and the baby, we kind of aid some of our culture that pushes the father out of the conversation. And we know that there are fathers who want to support women who are pregnant with their child, whether they're married or boyfriend, whatever the situation. We know that men grieve their aborted children. It's sometimes in very vast ways and different ways than women do. So we don't want to discount them, but because of the number of abortions that take place because of or in the circumstance where women are not supported by the men in their lives, we will talk a lot about women and babies. But I just wanted to kind of add that in there. We don't want to forget about the fathers, and we are also helping families that are in need. Where do we turn here? Well, the U.S. bishops started an initiative called Walking with Moms in Need, and it's inspired by John Paul II's Evangelium Vitae, and really his challenge to all of us to live out our baptismal call to build a culture of life right in our communities. So Walking with Moms in Need is an initiative where the Catholic communities really seek to walk in the shoes of those women and families that are pregnant in really difficult circumstances. Everyone should know how to help. We should have some kind of idea of how to respond to these women right in our own communities. This is not about turning all of our parishes into pregnancy resource centers, but we can support the resources that are around us. We need to identify where they are, support them in all the ways we can, and build up awareness so that when those girls and women enter into a pregnancy in a difficult circumstance, we want them to know already about the resources that are around them. We don't want them to end up going into Planned Parenthood for that first pregnancy test or that first discussion about their pregnancy. We want them to enter into the compassion and mercy that's shown through the Catholic and Christian entities that are there to help support these women. And where there are gaps in that support, we want to identify those gaps and be creative about how we can fill those gaps creatively right in our own communities. And over time, what the wishes is for this Walking with Moms in Need to really take on a whole parish engagement in helping girls and women to choose life for their babies. We want to make visible the local resources that are right in our own communities and already available, build the awareness for them. In some parishes, this might mean the birth of a new ministry, or it could be an extension of an existing Respect Life ministry. It could be introducing this kind of concept to a different parish ministry group. So this can take hold in a lot of different ways. So I'll give some tips on how to get started and find out more about this initiative for Walking with Moms, and then I'll tell you what we're doing right here in the Diocese of Trenton. To get started, I would encourage everyone to visit walkingwithmoms.com. This is a website that the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops has set up to kind of give a structure around what this concept might bring to your local community. On there, I'll just kind of pinpoint a few things you might want to take a look at. I will tell you, there's a lot of information on there, and I wouldn't want anyone to get overwhelmed. One person can initiate Walking with Moms in Need in their parish. It can grow organically, and it should grow organically according to the needs, the talents and treasures and resources that you have right in your own community. But don't be discouraged if you look and you say, this is too much for me. It can start with just one person. On that walkingwithmoms.com site, you'll see there's a helpful webinar that kind of gives the overview. I'm giving a really brief overview, but it'll kind of give you an overview of the inspiration for this concept and how it might take root in your home parish. There's a parish action guide, and I will tell you, it is extensive. It is there to say, like, if you had the best, biggest parish with the most resources, you know, how you could really make this idea flourish. So I would ask you to use that as an inspiration for your own parish community. There's an inventory tool that is really, really valuable. So this inventory tool lays out a table in which you can fill in what's happening in your local community. It will help you to identify different types of resources that a pregnant mom in need would really require in order to choose life. So there are things like pregnancy centers, food banks, and food pantries, different types of medical help. It offers you different areas within your community, even outside of your church, to explore, to find these resources and inventory them so you know exactly what's available right in your community. And then there's an image gallery, which I'll show you one of the images used because we're using it in the Diocese of Trenton. The image gallery has a beautiful graphic that says Walking with Moms in Need. And we're encouraging the use of this graphic here in the Diocese of Trenton, because we feel that it will help to really build awareness throughout our community and throughout different parishes doing Walking with Moms in Need initiatives, and even between our dioceses. Other dioceses in the state of New Jersey are also doing Walking with Moms. We're all using the same logo. So no matter where you go, you'll see a kind of a connection between our Catholic and our Christian communities who are supporting this idea and helping these moms. So how big or small your Walking with Moms in Need effort becomes really depends on your community. Feel free to start really small and pray and let it grow. All these materials can be really, really helpful for you to take a look at and review so that you're prepared to talk to a ministry leader or your pastor or your Catholic community leader to try and get this going. So in the Diocese of Trenton, we're fully embracing the Walking with Moms in Need initiative, and especially over the last couple of months. And even though we're in the summer months where a lot of our ministry workers really take some time off, as many of us do, we're seeing an energy among them, and they're starting to meet, they're starting to have discussions about how they can collaborate with others in their parishes to really bring all of this assistance to the moms right in our own communities. So the first way that I'm helping from where I am at the Chancery is we're creating a poster that's going to highlight the Catholic and Christian entities that are out there to help moms in need. And the idea would be that this would go out in order for every single parish to have a representation of Walking with Moms in Need. So I'll just kind of give you an idea. It's not finished yet, but this is the graphic that Walking with Moms that we're using, and you see there's a whole list of different pregnancy centers. And I've been taking this opportunity to really connect with a lot of these centers myself. I would encourage people out in the parishes to contact the pregnancy centers, contact Catholic Charities, and speak to them about the different programs that they have, because I think this will help re-energize our own ministry work and really help us to know better what is out there. One of the biggest steps that we've been able to kind of connect with in our parishes is connecting our Respect Life Ministry folks and Walking with Moms in Need with some of those structures that are already set up in our parishes that may be already serving people in need in different ways. So one of these groups is the St. Vincent de Paul Society. We have about half of our parishes in the Diocese of Trenton have active St. Vincent de Paul societies. Now, these are groups that are already out there serving the poor. And when I met with them, it almost hadn't occurred to them that they could provide this particular outreach to pregnant moms in need, that maybe especially those in our community who are seeing that they might be people in need. If they were pregnant moms in need, they might not know to go to the Catholic Church. And the St. Vincent de Paul societies that are starting to develop this idea are really excited. They're seeing this as an opportunity not only to have further outreach into communities, especially where their life and death situations are on the line, that they can offer real help. They're usually staffed with a confidential helpline, which is very important for a young girl or a mom in need, that she can reach out knowing that there'll be confidentiality and a non-judgmental atmosphere, so that they can start the conversation with these young girls and moms who are in need. Already in some of the parishes, they're starting out, those St. Vincent de Paul or other social concerns ministries, they're already starting to see that they can have a special mother-baby basket or corner or closet in their food pantry or in their outreach that reaches out directly to this vulnerable population, where they can provide prenatal vitamins, they can provide over-the-counter pregnancy tests, they can provide some of the basic care needs for moms with young babies. And that would be kind of an entry point for those ladies and those the girls and moms to know that the church is a place to go. We're also seeing some of our religious ed programs in our schools wanting to get involved. They see this as a way to really live the life of the Catholic mission while they're learning and experiencing the difficulty and the struggle that happens when our society kind of lives in a way with a disordered understanding of our sexuality and our family structures and who we are, where our culture really is pushing this kind of autonomous view of ourselves, but really we're born to live in community, and so by reaching out and serving these communities in need, they're seeing that they have a greater opportunity to really teach the Catholic ethic out into their schools and their programs. We're seeing also a lot of awesome collaboration with Christian churches in our communities in helping to share these materials and work with the Catholic Church so that we can all serve this community in need. Just a couple of last points. I'll say that we don't want to forget the service that we need to provide to those women and men who have been harmed by abortion. Many women that find themselves in a difficult pregnancy, unfortunately, have already experienced a pregnancy in a difficult situation, and many have chosen abortion. And we know that there's great emotional harm that goes along with this tremendous grief, both for women and men, anyone involved in abortion. And so we're including Project Rachel, which is the diocesan response for post-abortion healing, into these materials as well. Another thing that we're taking a very close look at is how we can help improve the ability for parents to relay the truth of sexuality and the beauty of being created male and female to their children, so that they can rightly understand the place of sexuality and of true marriage and the structure of the family as it was created to be, so that they could avoid some of the pitfalls that our culture pushes on our young people as far as their misunderstanding of who we're created as male and female. So, and lastly, through all of our my meetings with our ministries, I'm asking them to really contemplate and reflect on the visitation story, right? So the visitation story where we have Mary in an unexpected pregnancy in a very difficult circumstance, rushing out in haste to her cousin Elizabeth, who's also experienced an unexpected pregnancy at a difficult time in her life. And what do? They run out. Mary leaves in haste to go visit Elizabeth. Elizabeth sees her and rushes out to her. They join each other in a mutual a mutual assistance to one another in this time of difficult pregnancy. It's just such a beautiful witness to all of us that we can do this too. And lying below the surface of that story is the story of these two unborn children, right? That we see John the Baptist leaping in the womb to pronounce, like, prepare ye the way of the Lord. And Elizabeth reacts immediately, knowing what the truth was. Mary comes to Elizabeth really as the first Eucharistic procession and bringing Christ to Elizabeth in this very profound way. So as also we enter into this new Eucharistic revival, we want to reflect on this visitation story to see how we can recenter our work, to be holistic, to care for all human beings, especially those that are most vulnerable. So thanks, Jim, so much. I hope my comments have helped.
Rachel, thank you. That was very uplifting, I think inspirational, and it was a great food for thought. I think you addressed a number of the questions, or started to address a number of the questions we're starting to see in our Q&A box here as we move into our question and answer segment. So, John, can we go ahead and bring all of our panelists on? And we're going to move to our question and answer. I know we're at 7:30. I would invite the attendees, if you would like, please stay. We're going to do the question and answer period. Same with our panelists. If you can give us a couple of minutes and we'll do some questions. We may not get up to all of them tonight, but we'll certainly keep these questions and hopefully use them as topics for conversation in upcoming webinars or videos or even articles we put out through our newsletter. So I'm going to take the first question here because I think it's the simplest one to answer, and then I'm going to give our panelists the most difficult questions to answer tonight. So the first question is, will this webinar be recorded and made available for people to watch at a later date? Yes, we are recording the webinar, and we will be sharing this with our network, and we'll be sharing it with the diocese to share with their networks if they would like. So I think I answered the one question I'm sufficiently prepared to answer tonight, but I'm going to look through. We've started to highlight, and we've gotten a couple of these, so I may not read them verbatim, but first, Paul, I think this one is for you. This actually is an important one because we received word today that the House, or Speaker Pelosi, intends to post the Women's Healthcare Protection Act up for a vote tomorrow. Obviously, they voted on that bill in 2021. It passed in the House and has been held up in the Senate. I would say that this is a mere symbolic move. I mean, obviously, it's not one we like seeing because it still would have to pass the Senate, which I don't know if we're, where they stand in terms of, ending the filibuster to do that. So we'll see what happens. But we've gotten a couple of questions. How does the Dobbs case, or doesn't the Dobbs case, prevent the House, or I guess Congress in general, from passing such legislation, or how would the Dobbs case affect that legislation? I don't know if you can offer some comments on that.
Well, certainly, since there's no longer a federal constitutional right to abortion, this could not be supported under Section 5 of the 14th Amendment, which allows congressional legislation to implement the 14th Amendment. Nor, in my opinion, could it be justified under the Commerce Clause, because really what Congress will be attempting to do here is to overturn state laws saying certain conduct is criminal. I'm not aware of any instance in our history where Congress has passed a law that basically tells states you have to decriminalize conduct that you currently treat as criminal. I think that would violate the 10th Amendment. As far as the chances of this legislation going anywhere, I agree with you. I think it's more symbolic. The same legislation went nowhere in the Senate before. They actually had a vote, as I recall, in the Senate. It did not even get a majority, much less a supermajority. As far as I know, both Senators Manchin and Sinema are still opposed to carving out any exceptions to the filibuster rule for any type of legislation. And in the absence of that, they would need 60 votes. They don't even have 50 votes. So I think this is more symbolic than anything else.
Thank you, Paul. Charlie, this one, and Rachel, and Paul, if you want to offer any comments on this next question, feel free. I don't want to exclude anyone, but Charlie and Rachel, this may be more in your wheelhouse. We're getting a couple of questions. In addition to, we're talking about walking with moms in need, but are we prepared to do anything? And I'm kind of paraphrasing the question here because we've had a couple of touch on this, but what can we do in terms of walking with the fathers in need as well, or making sure the fathers are engaged in this process, whether it's the couple's married, or if they're in this situation and they're in an unmarried relationship. How do we I guess pastorally reach out to the fathers? And I think that is an important question to ask, especially today, because as a father myself, I find that secular culture is doing the best they can to minimize and almost remove fathers from the picture of family life. It's something that I often get on my soapbox that I'll avoid tonight, but I often feel like a father's portrayed as another child in the family, and lucky that they have an IQ of being able to tie their own shoes, but that's for another time. So would you either want to comment on that in terms of how can we do a better job as a church, as a community, in terms of engaging the fathers and making them part of this whole initiative that we're undertaking, helping them recognize their role.
Do you want to take it, Rachel, or do you want me to go?
Well, as I stated before, like, we don't want to leave fathers out of the picture. I think we do our communities a great disservice by only talking about the moms and babies, right? Because our culture has really pushed the dads out of the picture, and it's not fair, and it's not always accurate. So what can we do? I mean, I've even talked to some about, starting a Walking with Dads in Need, like, how do we support it? We need to start being creative about the way that we talk about these issues, I think, so that we're not being exclusionary. We're not playing into, society's pictures that the dads don't matter. I'll tell you a story that just happened over Memorial Day weekend. One of our prayer warriors were out in front of the Planned Parenthood in Trenton, and they were not having like a group of prayer warriors there as witness and sidewalk counseling that day, but this one woman went anyhow, and she sat in her car and she was praying the rosary kind of visibly, but she sat across the street, and what she witnessed was a young family. First, it was a woman clearly distressed standing in front of the Planned Parenthood with a man, and it was clear that the man was pleading with her, and there was obviously some very difficult conversation that they were having. It was getting, it was building up to a climax, and then out of a sidecar came two small children. So clearly this was a mom that was pregnant now and having two small children, and she seemed headstrong to go into the Planned Parenthood to have the abortion, and of course we don't know the real story. So, but as it was playing out, this young dad knelt down and kissed the belly of this mom and pleaded with her. And it was at that point she looked down and she smiled. They embraced and they left. And the dad had looked over at the woman praying in the car a couple of times, and she was just trying to very kind of softly affirming her prayer, and I'm sure asking the Holy Spirit to intercede. So here's a heroic story of this dad who was pleading at the literal steps of Planned Parenthood. We have heroic dads that are here, that are ready to stand and ready to support life. Not all of them are abandoning these women. So I would ask our attendees, all of us, our Catholic communities, how can we be creative in order to really include these dads in our conversations? Charlie, I don't know how you can comment on that.
Well, you set me up for failure with that unbelievably moving story, because that was amazing. But I guess I just want to say this, especially if there are any attendees or those that listen to this later on the recording, we need help getting data on lots of things here. And one of the reasons we need data is because for complicated reasons, historical reasons, the pro-life movement has often been connected with a Republican Party that is skeptical of a lot of these kind of interventions. And for us to really make inroads on that side of things, we sometimes will need, and this is good to be pushed on this, right? Data to show that these interventions actually work. And one of the critiques that has been thrown my way sometimes, and I'm wrong once in a while, my wife will tell you, goes something like this. Well, these are all well and good, but we need intact families, right? And we need fathers to be part of major parts. We want fathers to be present in even less dramatic ways than the one just described, but present to show women support, that they will be there in support. And the arguments from some of those that oppose these kind of interventions that I support go something like this. Well, that's fine. Paid family leave is fine. Child allowances are fine. Help with childcare is fine. But if they put make fathers less likely to be part of their families and to stand up for their families and to be part of their families, then we end up undermining something that's essential about what we need here. So I don't have much to add, except that, boy, it would be really good to find out through sociological studies or some other mechanism what sort of interventions do work and what other ones kind of undermine, especially the role that fathers should be playing.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Charlie, on that. Kind of following up on that question, we had another one, and I guess this is more in terms of what we would see as, what would be the most important. So the attendee asks, what is the top safety net legislation for which we should be advocating with our elected officials? So we're talking about, paid family leave, or various, I would say education subsidies, things of that nature. In your opinions or in your experience, I guess, Charlie, this is more directed at, in terms of your research. Has there been anything you've seen in terms of like what would be probably like the top of what we should be going for in terms of trying to advance this type of legislation? Like, is there a model, or is there something that you would tell us to look at?
Well, first, I'm glad this question comes on the heels of what I just said, because again, we could really use data. Frankly, we could use evidence to put in this direction in support of what I'm about to say. But what we do see, I mean, you could talk about, again, paid family leave, childcare, et cetera. The thing that really lowered child poverty and poverty overall were the huge child allowances that were given during, or at least substantial child allowances that were given, especially during the pandemic. We saw such a drop in childhood poverty as a result of that. And again, the economic structures that have been in place, which coerce either implicitly or explicitly women to have abortions, are almost always directly related to that economic vulnerability. So people like Mitt Romney and others are really advocating very strongly for, and Marco Rubio and others are advocating very strongly from a Republican point of view for these child allowances. And there seems to be some really broad-based support, bipartisan support for that. But I'll also just briefly add one intervention that we know works, and I don't know why we don't fund it more, we don't hear more about it, is something called perinatal hospice, which is an option offered to women with difficult prenatal diagnoses, which often, unfortunately, do lead to abortions. But if women are given the option to choose something like perinatal hospice, knowing their child will be taken care of if they have a limited life diagnosis, and will not feel pain and will be cared for and loved after birth, they're much less likely to have an abortion. So I could say more about that, but I really wish we'd have more funding and just general awareness of things like perinatal hospice as well.
So, and I'll just add to that comment on perinatal hospice. We have a couple of Catholic couples who have started ministry work in order to handle issues like this. Both of them had pregnancies that where the baby had trisomy disorders that they were told incompatible with life, which I'm just really not even comfortable with that term, incompatible with life. Clearly they were living in their mother's womb, and in for one of these couples, the baby was born and lived 3 days, and they've since started a foundation called Michael's Feet, and they support families that are dealing with critically ill newborns, because they were taken by surprise and unaware of how they could be supported in that hospital study for those only few days. And then there's another ministry called Jones Reach that was started by a local couple that also had a trisomy disorder in their baby. And unfortunately, their baby died before birth. But Barbara Keith, who's the founder of Jones Reach, really does incredible work to work to build awareness, even among the medical community, about perinatal hospice and all the beautiful work that they do to help parents parent their child through the whole pregnancy as they carry to term.
Thank you, Rachel. And Charlie had to jump off, so I do want to thank him again for being so generous this time. Paul, we are getting close to the almost hour and 15 minute. I don't want to keep people on too much longer. We have so many questions. We could be here all night. I do want to ask two final questions. One for you, Paul, and one for you, Rachel, if you don't mind. I think one of the things you're hearing overall, and it got some mention when the decision came out, because they focused on Justice Thomas's remarks, and now you're hearing more and more. And Paul, maybe you can expand upon this and help clarify it. But everybody's saying that now that Roe has been overturned due to the Dobbs case, we're going to see a number of privacy rights laws being overturned, and it's kind of so it's being it's being seen as the catalyst that we're talking about same-sex marriage, we're talking about contraception, and that's the reason why Roe could not be over. It was one of the reasons why Roe should not be overturned. So, and I think we're going to constantly hear that. So, I don't know if you can go into talking about the impact Roe will have on privacy rights cases moving forward, or even that general point that's being brought up, especially if we hear it and how we could address it.
Well, first of all, in Roe, the court itself recognized that abortion is a unique act that distinguishes it from the line of contraception cases. It would certainly distinguish it from the line of cases involving same-sex marriage, which of course came afterwards. So if we're talking about something that's really unique, the fact that there is no longer a right to abort, which is a unique act, I fail to see why that would necessarily carry over to other areas that have been protected by privacy concerns of the 14th Amendment. The only person who talked about that in the Dobbs case was Justice Thomas, and I think his perspective was kind of being lost in the discussion. Justice Thomas's view is that the due process clause of the 14th Amendment has no substantive meaning. It deals with process, not substance. Whether something is substantively protected by the Constitution, in his opinion, is determined by looking at the privileges and immunities provision of the 14th Amendment, not the due process clause. And he said, we may want to look at these cases, the ones you mentioned, in that context. I don't think there's any support on the court for revisiting any of these cases besides possibly Justice Thomas, nor do I think any state is going to take action that would revisit this. I think it's fanciful to suggest any state wants to ban contraception or even go back to trying to establish traditional marriage again. I've seen nothing like that. And I think in the absence of that, these are really more demagogic attacks on Justice Thomas. The court does not sit to decide things as a roving commission. They have to have a case that's brought to them. There has to be some kind of a challenge to something. I don't see that in the foreseeable future with respect to these other issues. And I think the majority opinion made a point of saying, look, these other rights are not at stake. They're not involved here. We're talking about a unique thing, and that is the intentional taking of unborn human life.
Thank you, Paul. And Rachel, just one final question for the night. I guess you get to close us out here. So, I think a number of our questions came up and asked, about how do we get more activity in our parishes? How do we, engage more people? Even questioning how do we approach, those who disagree with us? I think, sometimes when we work in the pro-life movement and we think of those who disagree with the church teaching on this outside of the church, we almost get a sense that 100% of Catholics agree on the church's teaching on abortion or a whole range of issues. So, we're obviously going to be dealing with this not only with people outside the church, but people next to us in our pews on Sundays. And, I guess from your experience, what would be some practical tips? Like, how do we not only keep our, composure, but see them through the eyes of love as Christ would want us to see them, and move forward in helping to change hearts and minds in our community? Oh, you're on mute, Rachel.
So a few things to consider is that we have to not judge these people that don't agree with us on these issues of life and even the unborn. As much as we know the reality of the sacredness of the unborn, that has not been fully revealed to everyone. And we can't assume that they have some diabolical kind of horrible agenda against the unborn child. Many of them truly feel that they're doing the best to support women, and they may not fully understand all of the issues involved there. And so they turn to see where the culture turns us, and to support women's rights. Women's have autonomy over their body. No one can tell them what to do. So by removing that assumption that they're seeking to do harm to the unborn child, let's then turn and see what good are they trying to do, and understand that and see where we can work together toward that good. In one of those very practical ways that we can is to focus on these women who are and families who are pregnant in a really difficult circumstance. I found that when ministries reach out for help for pregnant women, and under the assumption that they're choosing life for the women outside of the abortion debate, we get a tremendous response of generosity out from all communities of people. And, sometimes those in the pro-life ministry may be surprised that these people that they know are pro-abortion are coming and bringing diapers to the diaper bank and contributing money that they know that are going to crisis pregnancy centers. Now, this doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen. So we need to be open to everyone to contribute where they can, because if we can't start having a conversation on the areas on which we agree, then we're never going to get to a respectful conversation and debate about the abortion issue and the sanctity of life.
Well, Rachel, thank you for that great and concise answer to close us out. Once again, I want to thank our panelists, Paul, Rachel, Charlie, the generosity you gave us tonight with both your extensive experience, your knowledge, and your time. Thank you so much. It's truly appreciated on behalf of myself and everyone here at the conference and our attendees. To everyone who came on and joined us for our first webinar, thank you. Please go to njcatholic.org. We will be posting the recording of this webinar, so you can go back and watch it. Share it with your networks, but you can also sign up for our network, and hopefully you'll join us in the future. We have several webinars planned in the upcoming months on faithful citizenship as we get into campaign season, and we're going to be doing more, in terms of reaching out through other mediums. Rachel has a video interview coming out. You can learn more about her ministry as well as the ministry of other Respect Life directors in our state. So again, thank you, everyone. How about we close out with a glory be, and everyone have a good night. So in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and will be forever. Amen. And Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Yeah, and thank you, everyone. Have a great night. Be safe, and God bless. Thank you.
Thank you.